The U.S. government will shut down in 16 days if Congress can't agree on a budget before then. The state of negotiations are reportedly so dire, the White House is warning federal agencies to prepare for mass layoffs. CBS News congressional reporter Torian Small is live on Capitol Hill this morning. Torian, are there any indications that this reduction in force could include firings, not furloughs, meaning people will be gone? Who is going to own the shutdown if it happens? Is it the White House and the Republicans or the Democrats?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, is saying that firings is essentially what's expected here instead of what's been traditionally known as furloughs, where people would be laid off temporarily, but then able to return after. And then I guess the only true comparison point is when we saw the longest government shutdown happen under Donald Trump's first term. That was during 2018 to 2019 for around 35 days. More than 800,000 federal employees were affected. Just under half of them were furloughed. The other half were forced to work because they were deemed essential workers, but work without pay. That still would impact quite a few services. That means anything that has to do with American citizens and the federal government could see potential slowdowns or denial of services. But ultimately, though, when it comes to who's willing to take the blame, it appears both sides are pointing at each other. Democrats said if this would have been a bipartisan process during negotiation and on the Hill, they would have been willing to come to the table, but they're not willing to bail them out this time around like we saw what happened in March when it comes to Senate Democrats. Republicans, specifically the White House, is saying that Democrats are asking for way too much for a short-term spending bill. And to put this into perspective, this isn't an appropriations bill that would fund the rest of the year. This is just to get us through November, when we would then have to see this process happen all over again, Vlad.
And so there's a sense that both parties actually want the government to shut down. But are there any real winners in this scenario? In other words, Republicans, if the Democrats are responsible for this, they can then point to the inability of the Democrats to come together around an issue to better the American people. And if it's the Republicans, the Democrats can say, well, look, they're just playing politics. But it doesn't benefit anybody.
Yeah, I mean, the former on your point is actually pretty crucial, because during a hearing that happened a week ago with D.C. legislators, we saw pretty much the dangling of the carrot and the stick. There's about $1 billion that would go to restoring funding to the district, which is why Republicans say if Democrats are serious about giving D.C. its autonomy, they should vote to pass this continuing resolution. Democrats, however, are still pointing out the fact that they're just calling for the return of some funds that were pretty much stripped away during the One Big Beautiful Bill, the reconciliation package that passed without their approval. They're saying if the Trump administration can say we will restore what funding was cut from Medicaid, we'll also expand some benefits to tax incentives for health initiatives that was initially appropriated throughout the rest of the year, then they would be willing to help them get this across the finish line.
All right, Torian Small for us. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
So let's get to the White House right now. And CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. Willie, thank you for joining us on 24/7 today. The president is getting pushback on this from Democratic leaders, as you can expect and imagine, who are calling it a form of intimidation. So could firing federal workers backfire on the president?
Well, politically, Democrats certainly hope that could be the case, but it's still nonetheless up in arms, or up for this situation, I should say, or those federal workers, perhaps thousands of them, who will go without a paycheck if this funding doesn't go through. Now, we, of course, know that a bill to call about a continuing resolution that failed last week. It passed in the House but failed in the Senate. But President Trump is essentially blasting Democrats because he's saying that he reviewed their plans and calls it unserious and ridiculous demands coming from the minority radical left Democrats, the president noting there. Now, I'll note that Democrats had proposed a counter proposal of sorts that would have continued government funding for at least a month and On top of that, it would have rolled back some of the cuts to Medicaid funding that we saw in the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, and also continue some government subsidies for the Affordable Care Act and some more funding for public broadcasters. We, of course, know that that is a non-starter for Republicans, so that's why you see this public spat happening here. The president was supposed to meet with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer this week, but that meeting didn't happen after the president said in a social media post, as he said there, that he reviewed this plan because that meeting had been demanded by both Democratic leaders in a letter over the weekend. The president told us reporters here over the weekend that he would have loved to have a meeting to talk through a potential deal to come about a solution. But here we are. Tuesday is the government funding deadline. That's when government funding essentially runs out. October 1st would mean some of these programs, including those non-essential programs, workers will either be laid off or furloughed. We, of course, have to wait and see in terms of how this plays out. But the president not budging here, as at least in that social media post, blasting Democrats for this potential government shutdown, Mugo.